This was a really nice one I liked. This is from Julie in Chicago as well. What if you were in the middle of sex and weren't turned on anymore?
Wow.
Don't act like it don't happen.
Well, do you think men and women have a different way of dealing with that? Because I feel like as a man, it's much harder to hide that, right?
Yeah.
Because it presents itself physically in a, you lose your erection, whatever, and it's pretty obvious you're not turned on anymore. And as a female, I think there's more opportunity to kind of
Fake it.
BS your way through that.
Yeah, I think that, I think many women go through sex and aren't even turned on. I think it's more normal than we realize.
Yeah.
I think it happens way more often than we think, which goes back into like ideas of like, sex in general and who's supposed to be pleased and who's supposed to be pleasing who and whatnot, and how much you're supposed to be enjoying it with as like little stimulation as possible. Really, that's kind of how it's shown in the movies, at least. With men, I agree. And you know what? We took this human sexuality class, and I understood that there was a lot of pressure on men with a lot of aspects, especially sexually. But I really didn't feel for them until after that class. You're right. Like, if you're not turned on during sex and you're a man, it's
obvious.
Pretty obvious.
Yes.
And that's like humiliating for the man and for the female, because now you have a bunch of issues with the girl who's probably taking offense to it, taking it, personally. It may be personal, but obviously, you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, right?
Depends.
Any personal experience, Ingo?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I read a book called The New Male Sexuality.
Yeah.
It was recommended from this class. And it talks a lot about how sex is kind of, it's a no-brainer, but it's also, you shouldn't have to think about sex. But at the same time, if you're in the middle of sex and you're thinking about other things, that can definitely create issues as far as being aroused or having any kind of, a connection with your partner.
Sure.
That old saying of think about baseball, I think that's kind of a misnomer. That doesn't work. I think you have to be engaged. You have to be willing to kind of be open to trying different things. And sometimes things happen, and if your partner's okay with that and you realize there's other ways to kind of experience sex together versus, like the traditional, style, then maybe that moment doesn't become so detrimental and it's not such a chaotic event versus if someone really gets upset. For example, if the partner gets upset that, hey, I'm not hot anymore, like you don't love me, you don't care about me, now that creates a lot of anxiety. And as we all know, you cannot will an erection. It just doesn't happen. So, I mean, you have to be turned on. So from the female perspective, I think it really comes down to communication. I don't think it's fair to a guy for a woman to continue having sex and not let him know that, hey, by the way, I'm not into this anymore, because it creates I think it's kind of not being truthful, and that creates kind of some issues down the road as well. So
Do you think that would bruise a man's ego to hear a woman say that mid-sex?
I think it certainly would, but I think communication is more important. I think you have to be willing to be vulnerable and be willing to not hurt each other's feelings on purpose, but to be honest.
But let me ask you something.
Yes.
Communication is key, right?
Yes.
A lot of people, a lot of men, women as well, but let's just take men for right now, may have difficult times with communication. You want them to have communication not only in general, but in the middle of sex when they can't get an erection.
Yes.
You don't think that they're going to take more offense to things and be a little bit more vulnerable?
Probably.
So what do you do in that situation? If you have a man who is extremely vulnerable and kind of is closing himself off to communication in that moment because he's embarrassed.
The scenario is he's lost his erection, he's embarrassed now.
Yeah.
And the woman is doing what? Being understanding, or
let's say she's being understanding.
Okay.
But he's still so upset about it. What do you do?
That's a tough one. I think guys don't do themselves any service by continuing. I think the norm is guys are going to keep trying to get his erection back, and that's not the way to do it. I think you have to focus on something else. Even stop sex altogether for a while, or try to some other way of stimulating each other, whatever. Maybe even go back to the beginning of foreplay, and that stuff will work. I mean, it's a natural thing. If you're turned on, things work. Unless you have some kind of physical problem, which you certainly should see a physician about that. But barring any of that, I think everything works naturally when you're doing that. But if you're really, because the anxiety,
it's anxiety, and there's so many books that talk about how a female or a male not getting turned on during sex is really kind of a normal thing, and it happens a lot. And anytime you're in your head with anything else, whether it be something else going on in your life or body worries during sex, that can completely like turn everything off.
Yeah.
And that's anxiety provoking. So it all goes together kind of. So
it does.
It's all about relaxing, being with someone that you can feel relaxing around, feel comfortable around, and talk about it. It's so taboo to like talk about this and say like, hey, it's just not working for me right now, because you're automatically thought of as somebody who, can't do something, like you are without the ability. And that's not the way that it needs to be looked at, because we're all human beings and we all have our ups and downs.
That's true.
Right?
Yes.
But
so what do we boil it down to? Communicate, be honest, don't put so much pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
Be willing to kind of reboot things. And I've had this happen, and a partner was willing to kind of just chill for a minute, and everything went back to normal within a few minutes, because sometimes it happens,
Yeah, we make it into bigger deals than it really is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do those things, and hopefully you'll do all right. And I do recommend, as a guy, reading that book, The New Male Sexuality. It's excellent. Easy read. It's a lot of pages, but it's really, you don't have to read it cover to cover. You kind of go to a section of something you're experiencing, and you can learn a lot from that. So.